Hello and good morning, I'm Morgan Donner, and in my previous video, the one with all the circles, I had a quick little moment of pondering. I wonder if I could make a swimsuit. Are there medieval swimsuits? Which made me, of course, wonder, are medieval bathing suits a thing? So I spent some time looking into it, and the TLDR is no, not really. There definitely are images of people swimming in lakes and rivers and sort of pool-like structures. However, most of the time, they're not wearing anything. Maybe sometimes you'll see people wearing undergarments of some kind. However, you also see them wearing them in other contexts that make me believe that all they've done is strip down to their underwear and just kind of kept wearing them. This is mostly only on people we might identify as men as well, so For women, we don't tend to see any type of bathing suit at all. Maybe they're wearing some kind of headwear, and that's it. Now there is a bikini-esque type garment in the 4th century. While it's very similar to what we might think of a bathing suit looking like, I'm not really seeing any indication that they were used for swimming. This is also pre-medieval, so it's kind of whatever the point anyways. But for medieval stuff, while we might not have something that we would identify as a proper swimsuit that you use for swimming, there is a bathhouse dress. So at bathhouses, which are like these big tubs, people would come and there would be these attendants there to help with the bathing. They are often wearing these very interesting dresses that are kind of unlike anything else that we see in most other contexts. So it's like a sleeveless chemise, kind of spaghetti straps and then covering the bust down. And there's a lot of different variants. Some have more detail in them, some are very fitted, some are less fitted, belts, no belts. They've got a lot of variety. The very specific version that I am interested in is based off of the Lengberg Castle find in 2008. That's this. It was found with, I think, like a dozen or more other garments. So it's not the only thing that was found, but it's easily one of the most interesting for several reasons. One, it's got like side lacing, so you can see that it was a fitted garment. It was laced up. There's some stitching and threads on the bottom to indicate that it may have likely had a skirt attached that was just ripped off and the fabric reused for something else. And it has cups. It has what looks an awful lot like modern bra cups, which is why a lot of people will call this the Lengberg bra. It's so dang cool. Yeah, ever since the information about this was published, I wanted to make one, and you know what? There is no time like the present. So let's get to it. Now, of course, if I'm gonna be making a really nice historical garment and I've got plenty of linen and like linen thread, I can make this wonderful historical thing. I'm gonna, of course, ruin it by drafting my pattern via duct tape. I've never gotten to do the whole make a pattern via duct tape. Well, I've done one on my foot in my hose drafting video, which I can link to here somewhere, but I've never gotten to do it for like the waist part. So I think that'll be a lot of fun, and I've got leftover tape from moving anyway, so that's our plan. So my game plan is to use the saran wrap to kind of protect my shirt from the tape. I know that sometimes people, when they do this, will use like something that they don't mind throwing away. I don't really want to do a sacrificial shirt for this project. I will just start a taping and we will see if that works. This feels like a very unintentional preview of a future video. But anyways, I have saran wrapped my bust. It keeps on wanting to ride up, but honestly, that's probably a good indicator of exactly where the bodice should end. Like, it should end at the point where it wants to ride up, because I don't want the linen garment eventually to ride up either. So, you know, probably ending it right where this wants to kind of naturally end is, I think, a good idea. So now that I have hopefully mostly protected my clothing, I can go ahead and do some duct tape layers over top of this. All right, we are all taped up, and just a little bit of extra fun because I realized that the colors reminded me of something. I did end up needing to get a little bit of help with the taping on the back with Mr. Morgan Donner because I was not able to get quite what I was aiming for by myself. So I do think I'm going to maybe add just a little bit more saran wrap and tape or something to help kind of fill in this part, because I feel like that's where I'm gonna want the strap to go. It's just a little bit more this way. So I'm going to do a little bit of additional tape. And then from there, I think what I'm gonna do is use some marker to mark as best as I can what I think the seam lines are going to be. So this is a bit of a look. I've done my best to mark out all those seam lines. Couldn't really do anything in the back, but you know what? The back of the original garment doesn't exist anyway, so we're just gonna make it up and it'll be fine. So from here, I think what I'm gonna do is cut myself out of it. I'm gonna cut down this center front line as best as I can, and then cut it up into pieces so that we can use this as a pattern. So here is our full body torso piece, all looking good here on the table. I'm gonna go ahead and start cutting up a lot of the major seams, doing like a little bit of zhuzhing along the way as I kind of see fit. And once I've got all of the seams cut, or at least the majority of them, I did kind of notice that the back pieces here are very incredibly different. Just the difficulty of taping your own back, I guess. So that's not a big deal though. We are going to fix that later. For the bust piece, I added a bunch of registration marks, although I don't know that that was necessarily the most necessary, because if I was going to directly use this onto the fabric, that's probably great. But I'm going to do the same thing that I'm going to do with the back piece, which is take all of the right pieces and the left pieces and mush them together so that they are exactly symmetrical. So adding registration marks didn't really make a lot of sense, but you know, I props to myself for trying. Part of this whole making a pattern from duct tape involves a lot of flattening each piece, because the duct tape is very happy to curve around your body like these little cup pieces, but I need it to be nice and flat so that it can, you know, go onto the fabric. So I pick which edge I want to sort of curve out to accommodate that curve, and make a series of little cuts, which then means I can put it nice and flat on the table, and you can see here that the cuts sort of splay out to make that necessary room. After the cups are nice and flat, I also need to do the same thing for the body piece, but that's going to be a little bit trickier because it's going to want to sort of splay up on this top piece, but I want to keep it moderately square. So what I did for that is I took that pattern piece and put it down on some paper and sort of held it in the approximate position that I wanted it to hold and traced around it. I also traced the other half as well because the pieces aren't fully the same and I want them to be. Then I took this blue marker and made kind of a split the difference mark between the two. Some of the marks were quite similar, so I didn't have to change much, but there's definitely some parts where I wanted to kind of average out the two seam lines. After that, I added a 1/2 inch seam allowance, just using this ruler here, kind of going around the blue mark, that averaged out mark that I made. I then repeated this whole entire process for all the other pieces. So both of the cup pieces for the bust as well as the back piece. So I've just about finished up all of the tracing and stuff. I do have 2 pieces left, that little center front kind of insert area. It's actually going to be 1 piece. But once I get these finished up, I think I'm ready to cut out all of my pattern pieces and we can start looking at some linen. So just kidding. I realized as I was kind of finishing up this last piece that I need to add an extra inch and a half-ish to the side seam pieces so that they can be folded over and become kind of like a reinforcement strip for the eyelets, for lacing it up. So, whoops. Glad I caught that now. Fortunately, since the pattern pieces aren't very big, I was able to go ahead and use some scrap piece of fabric that I had lying around that was just about big enough to cut out all my pieces, which is fantastic. I also marked out the seam lines on most of these, not like in their entirety, but just a couple little marks to help make sure that I'm on the right track as I'm sewing everything together. But now that everything is cut out and marked, I think we are ready to stitch together. I'm going to use my sewing machine. I'm going to use a fairly loose basting stitch. That way, if it turns out that there's something that needs a little bit of adjusting, which is not unlikely, it's going to be very easy to take it apart rather than if I used very sturdy stitches. So after a bit of stitching and lots of pinning and all that, I have something that resembles a top. I'm a little bit dubious about its ability to fit me. You know how sometimes you look at a bra and you go, I don't think that bra's gonna fit me. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting, but who knows. But in order to try it on, I am going to first need to add some lacing into the sides. I'm just gonna do your standard sort of spiral lace medieval thing. Well, let's start with the good stuff. It fits pretty well. Like maybe the shoulders could be a smidge tighter. It fits nice, it feels comfortable. It gives a moderately nice shape and it's not quite as aggressively mono boob. So these are all great things. On the downsides, however, back piece looks great, but for the front piece with this seaming, it feels like it's in the wrong place. How much of it is that it's actually bad placement and how much of it is it's just not what we're used to. I did read that the original version of this garment, the Lengberg brassiere, looks like it was fitted for someone who's a little bit on the smaller side, chest-wise. If I stand side by side with the extant original, it's not the same. That's just gonna be the way it's gonna be, right? Like I'm not the same size as the original person. So what can we do from here? I feel like maybe I could take just literally this whole top half and just transplant it up. As for the cups themselves, I do feel like I could probably get away with giving them just a little bit more curve. It was based directly off of the, sort of tape dress form thing that I did, but, that's over clothing and over a modern bra. So, like, there's a certain amount of zhuzhing that we're gonna have to do in post. So I think that's my plan. All right, so before I fully decided that I wanted to commit to completely redrafting the pattern, I was like, well, let me try messing with the cups. I did big seam allowances for a reason, so I let out the center seam of the cups just a little bit. That helped a tiny bit, but not as much as I'd like. I also shortened the straps, and again, a little bit, but not quite right. And I was curious, started cutting open the cup seams to see like how much more cup I needed on the top edge here. It was loosey-goosey, so I stitched it. I feel like I've created a surprisingly sexy top. That was not my intention, but I am here for it. I'm weirdly covered and yet not, and it's surprisingly cute. But this is also very valuable because it tells me I need to add like exactly this much to the pattern in order to make a cup that fits better. That's nice because it means that this part, the frame of the cup, I think is good to go. I think I don't have to change it. I literally just have to make new cups, which fantastic. So once I had all of that patterning figured out, I did go ahead and stitch the new cups in place of where the old ones were. I was feeling confident enough that I went ahead and even did it by hand. And, I'm feeling pretty good. Like, it's definitely a little bit more of a rounded shape than it was previously, which I don't know that it's good or bad per se, but it's a different shape. But it does feel like this feels more intentional. This feels more like what a pattern should be. That's a very nebulous feeling, but I don't know how to say that better. It feels more good to go now. Maybe this cup seam could do with a little bit more room, but I'm gonna call it good enough and just move on to the next step. So what I'm gonna do is remove all the machine stitching and kind of replace it with hand stitching now that I'm happy enough with how things are looking. And then after that, I think it is time to work on the skirt. The bodice is about 80 95% done. Like, I've replaced most of the seams with hand stitching, which will just make me happier wearing it in the future. So I've got just a little bit less to finish up. Mostly though, it's going to be about adding some things that weren't already here. Like, I would like to go ahead and add a waist tape sort of thing to the waist, because that's going to be kind of under the most strain, especially once I do add the skirt fabric. So that's just going to help reinforce that area a little bit. But I added a sort of cord to the edge where it laces up on the side. One, that's what the original had, but also it makes sense. Like, you may have seen when I was wearing the mock-up that this lace-up edge was sort of pulling, there was a strain where the lacing string was pulling at the fabric. So adding something to that edge to help reinforce it. Now, I don't have any cord, so I am just using this sort of twill tape that I have. I rolled it up really tight and kind of stitched it up as a roll, and then inserted that. And I think that works fine. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and finish these last two edges and add that waist tape. And then I think the bodice is effectively done, which means that we can then actually move on to the skirt. Now, the skirt is just the same fabric as the bodice, some like kind of hefty linen. It might be a little bit heavy for this use, but fingers crossed that it works okay. Now, it's just the full width of the fabric. So once I have sewn the side seams, which there's just the two side seams here, and then done up a hem really quick, we can then go into attaching it to the bodice. All right, quick update. It is the night before I was intending to release this video, and alas, there's going to be no skirt footage because we have had a death in the family. All the other files before this moment were backed up, so they're fine and you can watch them, but everything from the last couple days is gone. Fortunately, at least the skirt's not super complicated, but in order to afford some replacement hardware, we are going to need to spend a little time talking about the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. I am still very much on a Procreate kick, getting my drawing skills up. I also find it really helpful motivation-wise if I keep on watching videos and hearing people talk about whatever the thing is that I'm doing. It just makes it so that it stays kind of current in my mind. I also learn little tips and tricks along the way, so I love that. Although I did very briefly let myself get distracted by Learn Fabric Smocking by Dominika Saczynska. There's something about modern smocking that is so much more dimensional and like texturally engaging than historical smocking. It took every ounce of my willpower not to put this dress project down and immediately start playing with some of the different smocking techniques that she was sewing. But whatever it is you're into, whether it's smocking or photography or website design, like, there's something that you're going to really enjoy on Skillshare. And the first 1,000 people who use my link in the description will get their first month free. It's worth checking out. I think you guys will have a lot of fun with it, and maybe you can use it like me to help you kind of keep motivated in whatever you're already working on. I find that really helpful. All right, let's very briefly talk about the skirt. Fortunately, at least you guys aren't missing too much. It's a fairly simple shape. I did end up reducing the waistband by quite a bit. The original fabric width, I think, was about 55 inches, and I found that was just too much to try and pleat into this waistband, so I reduced that down to 35 inches. I ended up cutting it in a slightly trapezoidal shape because I wanted to keep that nice width at the bottom, but just reduce down the waist some. I was also originally going to do like cartridge pleating, which tends to be my absolute favorite. However, it didn't seem right. It didn't feel like it was going to work well with this garment, so I instead went to knife pleats, which are honestly not my usual favorite, but I think make a lot of sense for this particular garment. It means that this is going to fit nicely with stuff over top of it if it actually is meant to be an undergarment of some kind. If not, doesn't matter. The knife pleats still look nice, especially as long as you do them like nice and small like this. At least for my own aesthetic preference, I think it looks much better when you have little pleats. I hemmed the bottom, I finished the side seams. I did make the side seams fairly wide because I wanted to make sure that there was enough like extra width in here to use as the continuation for the lacing. Now this lacing here isn't actually doing any sort of, you know, form fittingness like the bodice is, but it does keep the skirt closed there, which is just aesthetically nice. But at the end of the day, everything's good because I'm really, really happy with how it turned out. There's something about this style that is maybe not the cutest when you first look at it, but especially once I had it on, I felt really, really cute. I don't know, something about the shape I think is very flattering, and I think it could actually translate beautifully to like a modern, you know, summer dress, especially if you did just a little bit of updating. Like for the bust, maybe if you added a sort of gathered section a la Marilyn Monroe, that would look really, really cute. Or you could change up the cups so that instead of a seam underneath, change it so that it's just a princess seam all the way down, but you keep some of the really interesting seam treatments that are going on up at the top. Like, there's, you know, lots of ways that you could kind of play with it, but she's pretty dang cute as it is. And I think that while the duct tape method that I used at the very beginning didn't give me all of the information I needed to perfectly translate this into a beautiful fitting garment right off the bat, and some of that may have just been my own error in translating the tape to paper pattern, but with relatively minimal changes, we got there, and I'm really, really happy. I think it's also extra cute if you add a sort of contrasting waist tie. This is maybe a little bit stark for this one, but I feel like, you know, a red one or like a baby blue would be really cute, or like yellow and floral if you wanted to go very spring and summery. Like, I think there's a lot of potential with a good waist tie and like maybe a cute little shoulder shrug jacket, again, if we're talking about modernizing it. The only thing I can think of that I kind of wish that I had done differently was this front section here on the original Langberg bra had a sort of net-like material called sprang, which I don't know how to do and I'd love to try someday, but you know, I figured for the scope of this video, would skip it. But I do feel like it would definitely add something to have a sort of sheer section, you know, kind of sexy lace, you know, area here at the front. I think that would be really, really cute. So fortunately though, I did sew in that piece separately. It is its own piece, so I could very easily take that out and put in some sprang or other type of lace if I get the druthers to do so. I am very glad that I also added in that sort of cording reinforcement along the waist. Like, I don't think I've ever thought to do that. I've done it with boning, of course, but using a cord is surprisingly effective for helping sort of stabilize that edge, and I copied it from the original one. So like, that's really, really cool. Speaking of which, the researchers who have been, you know, studying the original version of this garment for years and years and years are, I believe, putting out a pattern soon. I don't know how soon precisely, but whatever information I can find about it, I will put down in the description. If I can find where it's going to be on sale, I'll put a link to that. And I will, of course, link to the paper where I got all of my information about this. There's a lot of little changes that I did to this that aren't on the original, so if you kind of want to really know how it was done, go back and check that link in the description. And yeah, I'm still really, really happy with how it all came out. I am also slightly disappointed that there isn't really any rivers or lakes for me to take a dip in to demonstrate its swimming capabilities. Everything is a frozen tundra right now, so sorry. I could go stand on the lake, but I don't think that'd be quite the same effect. Although I do have ideas about something I could do to fix that situation. But maybe that'll be a thing later. For right now, you know what? So while I don't have access to some natural water sources, it's not called a river dress or a lake dress. It is called a bath dress. Oh, this is a terrible idea. Oh, that's just not where I thought this video was gonna go.